My father's final secret was a 3-ton steel monolith, a sentinel that had mocked my billions and the world's best for 6 agonizing months. It wasn't just metal. It was a riddle I couldn't solve, guarding a truth that would shatter my empire. For 6 agonizing months, the sentinel had mocked me. It sat in the corner of my late father's study, a 3-ton behemoth of chrome and obsidian steel that had swallowed the last of his secrets. My father, Marcus Vance, was a man who collected secrets the way others collect art. He believed information was the only currency with true, lasting value, and the Sentinel, his custom-built Hartmann safe, was his Fort Knox. He died of a sudden aneurysm during a board meeting, leaving me his empire, his fortune, and this silent, immovable testament to his paranoia. And crucially, no combination. I am not a patient man. Patience is a virtue for those who have to wait. I, Arthur Vance, do not wait. I act. I acquire. I solve. And for 6 months this safe had been the one problem my billions couldn't solve. I'd flown in a team from Zurich, so-called security artisans, who arrived with ultrasonic scanners and micro drills that looked like surgical instruments. They spent a week tapping, listening, and mapping its internal mechanics, only to finally pack up their very expensive equipment and declare it unbreachable without compromising the contents. Compromise wasn't an option. My father had hinted that the safe contained not just bearer bonds and rare jewels, but the original deeds and controlling documents for the foundational pillars of our entire corporate structure. Damaging them would be corporate suicide. Next, I brought in a legendary safecracker from Vegas, a man they called the Ghost. He was a wiry old-timer with hands as steady as a surgeon's and eyes that seemed to see through metal. He worked alone, at night, with only a stethoscope and a tumbler of my best scotch. After 3 nights of intense silent communion with the Sentinel, he admitted defeat. "It's not a lock, Mr. Vance," he'd rasped, his confidence shattered. "It's a riddle, and I don't speak the language." He didn't even charge me, a blow to my pride far greater than any invoice. Today was my final, desperate attempt. A brash team from MIT with a quantum magnetometer and more ego than sense were making their final scans. The study, my father's sanctuary of oak and worn leather, was a mess of cables and humming machines. I stood by the bay window staring out at the manicured lawns of my estate, the frustration a bitter acid in my gut. Every so often my gaze would drift to the boy. His name was Leo. He was the son of my housekeeper, Maria. Maria had been with our family for 30 years, a quiet, efficient woman who was more a part of the house's fixtures than a person. Leo was about 16, I think, a scrawny, silent kid who always seemed to be lurking in the periphery. He had this habit that drove me insane. He carried a tattered sketchbook and a handful of charcoal pencils everywhere he went. While his mother dusted priceless antiques, he would sit in a corner, sketching. Not the antiques, not the portraits of my ancestors on the walls. He sketched patterns, the grain in the floorboards, the way light refracted through a crystal decanter, the intricate weave of a Persian rug. He was doing it now, sitting on a stool near the doorway, his eyes fixed on the safe, his hand moving in swift, confident strokes. I found it pathetic. A boy with his head in the clouds, doodling his life away while his mother scrubbed toilets. "Anything?" I barked at the lead technician, a young man with a ridiculous haircut and a perpetually smug expression. He pushed his glasses up his nose, avoiding my eyes. "The alloy is unconventional, Mr. Vance. It's almost organic in its composition. It seems to dampen any attempt to scan it. We're recording nothing but white noise." I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. A fortune in technology, and they were being defeated by a fancy metal box. It was infuriating. My frustration needed a target, and my eyes landed on the boy again. He was so engrossed in his stupid drawing he hadn't even flinched at my outburst. "You," I snapped, pointing at him. "Shouldn't you be, I don't know, doing homework? Or are you planning to make a living drawing squiggly lines?" Leo's head shot up, his eyes wide like a startled deer. Maria, who had just entered with a tray of refreshments, froze in the doorway. He didn't say anything, just clutched his sketchbook to his chest. His silence annoyed me even more. "Let me give you some free advice, kid," I continued, walking towards him. I gestured around the opulent study. This doesn't come from doodling. It comes from ambition, from ruthlessness, from understanding how the world actually works. You stare at that safe like you have some kind of connection to it. Let me tell you what it is. It's a box. A very expensive box that is making my life very difficult. It's not art. It's an obstacle. He just stared at me, his dark eyes unblinking. It was unnerving. Maria hurried forward. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Vance. Leo, go to the kitchen, now." The boy scrambled to his feet, but as he turned, a page fell from his sketchbook. It fluttered to the floor. I instinctively bent down and picked it up before he could. I expected a childish drawing of a car or a superhero, but it wasn't. It was the safe. Not a picture of it, but a detailed schematic of the locking mechanism, the dial rendered with impossible precision. But overlaid on top of it were constellations. Lyra, Cygnus, Aquila, star charts and geometric patterns, all converging on specific numbers on the dial. It was bizarre, nonsensical. "What is this garbage?" I scoffed, holding it out to him. "Astrology? You think you're going to open this thing with star charts?" He snatched the paper from my hand, his face flushing with color. He mumbled something I couldn't hear. "Speak up," I commanded. He looked at his mother, then at the floor and whispered, "They're not just stars, they're the answer." I let out a short, sharp laugh. The technicians snickered behind me. The sheer absurdity of it was almost a relief from my frustration. The son of my maid, the quiet little artist, thought he could open the world's most secure safe with a drawing of the summer triangle. "I see," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "My apologies. I didn't realize we had a modern-day Nostradamus in our midst. By all means, don't let us experts with our quantum physics get in your way." The head technician finally gave up, powering down his machine. "It's no use, Mr. Vance. We're done. Defeat. Final, absolute defeat." The room fell silent, the only sound the quiet packing of equipment. I stared at the sentinel, the cold steel seeming to smirk at me. Then a small, hesitant voice cut through the silence. It was Maria. "Mr. Vance," she began, her hands twisting in her apron. "Please, don't be angry. But he's been watching you, watching all the men who tried to open it. He sees things, patterns. My Leo, he's different." I turned to her, my eyebrows raised in disbelief. "Maria, with all due respect, I am not in the mood for fairy tales." "Please, sir," she begged, her voice trembling but gaining a strange strength. "Just let him try. What is the harm now? Everyone else has failed. Please, just let him touch it." The air in the study grew thick with a strained, uncomfortable silence. The MIT technicians had stopped packing their cases, their faces a mixture of pity for the housekeeper and blatant amusement at my expense. Maria's plea hung in the air, a preposterous suggestion that grated on every fiber of my being. Let him try? Let this scrawny boy who lives in a fantasy world of charcoal lines and star charts touch a piece of engineering that had defeated the world's best minds? The humiliation was palpable. Yet, what was the alternative? Admitting defeat, crating up the sentinel and storing it in a vault like some monument to my own inadequacy. The thought was intolerable. I looked from Maria's desperate face to Leo's, who was now staring at the safe with an unnerving intensity, as if it were calling to him. A dark, ugly thought slithered into my mind. Fine. Let him try. Let him fail. Let this be the final, farcical act in this 6-month drama. I would expose his delusions, put an end to this nonsense, and then I would have the damned thing cut open with a plasma torch, contents be damned. "Fine," I said, the word coming out colder than I intended. The technicians exchanged smirks. "Let the artist have his moment." I waved a dismissive hand towards the safe. "Go on, boy, work your magic. Dazzle us." Maria shot me a look of profound gratitude before nudging her son forward. Leo walked towards the sentinel, not with the swagger of a showman, but with the quiet reverence of a pilgrim approaching a shrine. He didn't carry a stethoscope or any tools. He just had his tattered sketchbook, which he laid open on a nearby table. The main locking mechanism was a masterpiece of over-engineering. A large circular dial, milled from a single block of tungsten, was set flush into the obsidian door. It had no numbers, only 100 finely etched hash marks. Surrounding it were 4 smaller concentric rings, each inscribed with symbols I didn't recognize, part astrological, part alchemical. It was the kind of thing my father, with his love for the esoteric and theatrical, would have commissioned. Leo didn't touch the dial at first. He placed his fingertips lightly on the cold steel of the door, just beside the mechanism. He closed his eyes. His lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. He was, for all intents and purposes, communing with the blasted thing. The head technician let out a snort of laughter, which he quickly tried to stifle as I shot him a death glare. My own face was burning with embarrassment. This was a circus. After a full minute of this silent meditation, Leo's eyes snapped open. They were clear and intensely focused. He walked back to his sketchbook, studied one of his drawings for a moment, then returned to the safe. His hands, which I'd always seen smudged with charcoal, moved with an impossible grace and certainty. He placed his left hand on the top concentric ring, his right on the main dial, and he began to turn them. It wasn't the slow, patient rotation of a safecracker listening for tumblers. It was a fluid, dance-like sequence. He'd turn the main dial 3 clicks to the right, then spin the upper ring a full rotation counterclockwise, followed by a quarter turn left on the main dial. The movement seemed utterly random, yet he performed them with rhythmic precision, his eyes darting back to his sketchbook every few moments as if it were a sheet of music. The safe remained stubbornly silent. The technicians started whispering among themselves, their amusement returning. I crossed my arms, my jaw tightening. I'd give him 2 more minutes of this foolishness before I threw him out myself. "This is ridiculous," I muttered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. Enough of this. Just as I took a step forward to end the charade, it happened. It wasn't a loud clunk like in the movies. It was a soft, resonant chime. The sound was so pure and unexpected, it seemed to vibrate in the very bones of the room. Everyone froze. The technician's jaw hung open. Leo didn't even seem to notice. He was already moving on to the next part of his sequence, his fingers now gliding over the other concentric rings, adjusting each one by minuscule degrees. With each adjustment, another chime sounded, each one at a slightly different pitch. It was like he was tuning a massive metallic instrument. He was following the patterns in his sketchbook, the constellations I had mocked. He was tracing the stars on the lock. After the 4th chime, a low hum started to emanate from deep within the safe's door, and a thin, hairline seam of blue light appeared around the circumference of the main dial. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was impossible. The Zurich team's report had said the safe was entirely mechanical, a work of classical security engineering. There was no mention of an electronic component, no power source. It defied logic. It defied physics. Leo placed the palm of his hand flat against the center of the main dial. The blue light intensified, pulsing in time with the low hum. He closed his eyes again, his brow furrowed in concentration. The chimes had stopped. The only sound was the deep, vibrating thrum that seemed to be making the crystal on my bar tremble. He held it there for 10 seconds, then 20. I found I was holding my breath, my earlier scorn replaced by a raw, disbelieving awe. Then, with a sound like 1,000 tiny ball bearings rolling into place, the entire central mechanism, the main dial, and the 4 concentric rings began to retract into the door. It didn't just sink back. It telescoped inwards with a whisper-quiet, hydraulic hiss. The blue light flared, forcing us to shield our eyes for a second, and then it vanished. Where the intricate dial had been, there was now a smooth, black glass surface, completely featureless. And in the center of the glass, a single point of light began to glow, slowly expanding and resolving itself into a perfect, shimmering image of a human handprint. The handprint glowed with an internal, pearlescent light, hovering on the black glass screen like a ghostly apparition. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint buzz of the overhead lights. The MIT team stood frozen, their faces pale with shock and professional envy. Maria had her hands clasped to her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fierce pride. And I couldn't process what I was seeing. A biometric scanner. My father loathed biometrics. He called them a charlatan's lock, easily fooled, prone to failure. He believed in steel, in mechanics, in complexity that couldn't be hacked or replicated. Yet here it was, the ghost of a hand, demanding a very specific touch. Leo, looking exhausted but resolute, turned away from the safe and looked directly at me. His gaze wasn't triumphant or arrogant. It was strangely sad and filled with a knowledge that made him seem far older than his 16 years. "It's not for me," he said, his voice quiet, but clear in the silent room. "I can only show the way. The key is a memory." I stared at him, then at the glowing handprint on the safe. "What are you talking about? A memory? What key?" "Your father," Leo began, then glanced at his mother, as if for permission. Maria gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "He used to talk to me, sometimes, when I was sketching in the garden." This was news to me. My father barely spoke to his own board members, let alone the staff's children. He moved through his world like a shark, all forward momentum and cold purpose. The image of him pausing to chat with a quiet boy sketching flowers was utterly alien. "He told me about patterns," Leo continued, his voice gaining confidence. "He said most people see the world as a collection of things, a chair, a tree, a person. But he said the truth of the world, the real power, was in the patterns that connect them. The patterns in the stock market, in politics, in the stars. He said if you could see the patterns, you could see the future." He gestured towards the safe. "That's not a lock, Mr. Vance. It's a star chart, from a specific night, a specific moment. He called it his origin point. The chimes, they align the star map. But opening it requires the final piece of the pattern, a human connection." My mind was reeling. A star chart? An origin point? It was exactly the kind of cryptic, grandiose nonsense my father would have devised. But the handprint? Whose hand was it supposed to be? "My hand won't work," I said, stating the obvious. "I've never touched this thing." "No," Leo agreed softly. "It's not your hand it's waiting for." He looked down at his own small, charcoal-smudged hands, then back at the glowing print. There was a long, heavy pause. The answer hit me like a physical blow, a sudden, gut-wrenching realization that made the air rush from my lungs. It couldn't be. It was impossible. A sick, cold dread began to creep up my spine. "He said," Leo's voice was barely a whisper now, "that the greatest secret wasn't what was inside the safe. It was the key to opening it. He said it was proof that his greatest strength was never his mind, or his money, but his heart." The glowing handprint on the safe was large. A man's hand. But it was slender, with long, elegant fingers. Not the thick, powerful hands of a titan of industry like my father. Not my own hands, which were a carbon copy of his. I thought back to every meeting, every handshake, every person who had ever been in this study. No one fit. No one except... My gaze flickered to Maria. She stood by the door, tears silently streaming down her face, her expression one of profound 30-year-old sorrow. She wasn't looking at the safe. She was looking at her son. Leo. My blood ran cold. The quiet boy. The doodler. The son of my housekeeper. The one who saw patterns. The one my father, a man who spoke to no one, apparently confided in. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The way he looked at the safe not as an obstacle, but as something familiar. The way he knew its secrets were not mechanical, but astronomical, philosophical. The way he knew the key was a memory, The handprint on the safe wasn't waiting for me. It wasn't waiting for my father because he was gone. It was a digital ghost, a recording of a touch made long ago. A touch that had set the final parameter of the lock. I looked at Leo's hands, then back at the glowing print. They were a perfect match. Not his current hands, but what his hands would grow to be. They were the hands of his father. I turned my head slowly, mechanically, to face the boy who had just unlocked the biggest mystery of my life. He was no longer just the maid's son. He was a living, breathing part of the puzzle. My voice was a dry, rasping thing I barely recognized as my own. "Leo," I said, the name feeling foreign and heavy on my tongue. Who is your father?" Leo didn't answer. He just looked at me with those old, sad eyes. He didn't have to, because as I stared at his face, really looked at him for the first time, I saw it. It wasn't obvious, not in the way I resembled my father. It was subtle, in the sharp line of his jaw, in the intense focus of his dark eyes. It was the unmistakable ghost of Marcus Vance staring back at me from the face of a 16-year-old boy. The revelation hung in the air, heavier and more immovable than the safe itself. The MIT technicians, finally grasping the seismic shift that had just occurred, began to discreetly pack their remaining gear, their earlier mockery replaced by a stunned, awkward deference. They were no longer witnesses to a technical problem. They were intruders in a family tragedy. I felt the floor drop out from under me. For my entire life, I had been Arthur Vance, the sole heir, the undisputed successor to the Vance Empire. Now, in the space of a single heartbeat, my reality had fractured. Maria finally broke the silence, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Marcus, Mr. Vance, he loved my son. He provided for us always, from a distance. He said it was the only way to protect him, to protect both of you." Protect me, or protect his secret? I looked at Leo, this boy I had sneered at, this quiet shadow in my home, my brother. The word felt like a shard of glass in my throat. My father, the man who preached about lineage and legacy as if it were a religion, had a secret son. And he had made that son, not me, the ultimate key to his entire life's work. The bitterness was a coiling serpent in my gut. He hadn't just hidden a child. He had hidden his heart. Leo seemed to shrink under my gaze. "He didn't mean to hurt you," he said, as if reading my thoughts. "He was complicated. He said the safe would only open when you were both ready, when you could see past the metal and the money, when you could see the pattern." "The pattern," I repeated, the words tasting like ash. "And what pattern is that, Leo?" "Us," he said simply, gesturing from himself to me. "He built an empire, but he created a broken family. He said the lock wasn't to keep people out. It was to bring the right people in, to bring us together." After he was gone, he walked back to the safe, to the glowing handprint that was a ghostly echo of his own future. He looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. All the anger, the jealousy, the searing sense of betrayal, it was all there. But looking at this boy, who had lived his entire life in the shadow of my own, who held the key my billions couldn't buy, I saw not a rival, but a reflection of my father's profound loneliness. My father had built walls his whole life, and the Sentinel was just the final, most elaborate one. But he had left a key, a living, breathing key. My legs felt like lead as I walked towards the safe. I stood next to Leo, my half-brother. I was taller, broader, a product of privilege and power. He was slight, artistic, a product of secrets and observation. We were two sides of the same coin, minted by the same complex, brilliant, and flawed man. I looked at the glowing handprint, a symbol of a legacy I now had to share. "It needs a living person to complete the circuit," Leo explained softly. "A blood relative. It won't accept him," he gestured to his own hand, "because the pattern is incomplete without you. It needs both halves." He looked at my right hand, then at the glowing print. The final piece of the riddle clicked into place. It wasn't my father's handprint, or Leo's. It was an amalgam, a symbolic representation that required us both. My father hadn't chosen one son over the other. He had bound us together. Slowly I raised my right hand. Leo raised his left. Our eyes met, and in that moment the rivalry and resentment began to dissolve, replaced by a fragile, terrifying sense of connection. We were strangers, bound by the blood of a man we had both loved and misunderstood in completely different ways. Together we placed our hands on the cool glass screen. My larger hand covered his, our fingers overlapping, our palms pressing against the light. For a second, nothing happened. Then the light flared from pearlescent white to a deep, resonant gold. A final, beautiful chime echoed through the study, and with the silent, perfect precision of a tomb opening for the first time in centuries, The 3-ton obsidian door swung inwards. The air that drifted out was cool and dry, smelling of old paper and cedar. The interior was not the glittering treasure trove I had imagined. There were no stacks of gold bars or heaps of jewels. It was lined with dark, polished wood, like a library vault. On a series of meticulously organized shelves sat stacks of leather-bound journals, deeds, and stock certificates that represented the true heart of my father's empire. But in the very center, on a raised velvet pedestal, sat 2 objects. The first was a simple, framed photograph. It was of my father, much younger, smiling a genuine, unguarded smile I had never seen in my life. He was sitting on a park bench, and beside him was a young, radiant Maria, her head resting on his shoulder. And on her lap, a tiny baby was sleeping. Leo. Beside the photograph was a single thick envelope made of heavy vellum, sealed with my father's signet ring. My name, Arthur, was written on the front in his familiar, sharp handwriting. My hand trembled slightly as I reached in and took it. Inside was a letter, several pages long. It wasn't a business document. It was a confession, a last will and testament of the soul. He wrote of his love for Maria, a love he felt he couldn't acknowledge without destroying both our families. He wrote of the joy and terror of having a second son, a boy with an artist's soul so different from his own. And he wrote of me. He wrote of his pride, but also his fear, that in raising me to be a ruthless successor, he had starved my heart. "I have left you an empire, Arthur," the final paragraph read, "but I have left you a brother, Leo. The empire will one day turn to dust, as all things do. But brotherhood, that is a currency with true, lasting value. The safe was never about what was inside it. It was about what it took to open it. It was my final, desperate hope that you would both see the pattern and choose to be family. The choice, as always, is yours." I folded the letter, the paper soft and worn in my hands. The fortune, the secrets, the power, it all seemed secondary now. The silence in the room was no longer heavy or awkward. It was peaceful. I turned to look at Leo, who was staring at the photograph of his parents with tears in his eyes. He wasn't the maid's son anymore. He was Leo Vance, my brother. The future of our family, the part I never knew was missing, was standing right beside me. And for the first time in 6 agonizing months, I felt like the truly priceless thing had finally been found.